Lena, dubbed the Fat One, stood on the platform, her shame screaming louder than the jeers of the crowd. She was sold like cattle, an object of ridicule. Her father, his face flushed with cheap liquor, hurled insults, throwing her flaws in her face. Every penny and every sneering remark pierced her heart. It was a marketplace of shame. Suddenly, from the shadows, emerged the mountain man, a recluse whispered about with fear. His gaze cut through the crowd. Instead of bidding, he threw down double the sum, silencing the jeerers. "I have just bought a jewel," he declared, his low voice carrying a challenge. It was a declaration that defied societal perception, and his action spoke of true worth. In his mountain sanctuary, far from the judgmental eyes of hypocrites, Lena began to forge her dignity. Where society saw a burden, she was discovering an indomitable strength. She understood that true worth lay in the ability to rise and build one's own dignity, not in being debased by others. Yet, in quiet moments, she heard the inner scream of her former self, the one they called the burden. The shadows of the past, her father's words, and the crowd's jeers still whispered in her mind, despite the promise of each sunrise. The mountain man, a silent guardian, watched her struggle as the echo of shame was replaced by unyielding self-belief. Until one day, smoke obscured the horizon, bringing news of a fire that consumed the town and reached their isolated cabin. The crowd, once her judge and executioner, now faced destruction themselves. Those very people who had watched her humiliation with cruel delight, calling her the burden and the fat one, had lost everything. The irony of fate was bitter. Lena felt a strange pang, not of satisfaction, but of complex emotions. Did those who had scorned her deserve her compassion? Soon, the conflagration forced them to seek shelter. They appeared at the mountain man's cabin, the very people who had abandoned and sold. The sight of their ravaged faces brought back painful memories of utter abandonment. Lena remembered the sting of every penny and every sneer. She had been sold, humiliated, and now these very people stood on her doorstep, powerless and desperate. Her newfound strength would be put to the test. Could she forgive those who had condemned her? Lena, called the Fat One, stood on the platform, humiliated. She was being sold like cattle, an object of ridicule. Her drunken father hurled insults in her face. Every penny and every sneer dug into her heart, a marketplace of shame. From the shadows emerged the mountain man, a recluse inspiring dread. His powerful silhouette silenced the crowd like a peal of thunder. His eyes, like ancient stones, quelled the jeers, creating a tense silence. The auctioneer stammered. The mountain man's voice rasped, "Double." Heavy coins clattered onto the table. It was a decree, not an offer. His eyes met Lena's, filled with raw authority, yet devoid of judgment. "I have just bought a jewel," he declared, and the community's faces contorted in consternation. Lena felt the ground give way beneath her. A jewel? Her? A burden? Fat? A shame? A murmur of disbelief rippled through the square, quelled by the mountain man's icy gaze. The crowd, united in mockery, dispersed in fear and indignation. Lena did not understand his motives. In his eyes, she saw serenity and determination. Despite her shame, a tiny seed of hope sprouted in her soul. He stepped onto the platform. Without a word, he extended a calloused hand. Lena hesitated, but his hand was firm and gentle. As their fingers touched, she felt an unexpected warmth. He helped her descend. For the first time, she felt treated with care, not as a burden. He took off his own leather jacket and draped it over Lena's shoulders, covering her torn dress and her shame. A simple gesture, screaming protection. The mountain man nodded toward the exit. The crowd parted, a sea of pale, affronted faces. Lena, wrapped in his jacket, felt its weight and warmth. Each step was a small victory over humiliation. He walked ahead, strong and unwavering, leading her with the respect she had never known. The only sounds were the creak of the cart and the heavy silence of the community watching them leave. As they rode away from the town, the echo of his words, "I have just bought a jewel," reverberated in Lena's mind. She, always a burden, an obstacle, the family's shame. Her cheeks burned from the crowd's cruelty, but beneath the jacket, a different warmth spread. It was not desire or pity, but an acknowledgement of worth she had forgotten. The mountain man's silent, resolute actions planted a seed of hope in her heart. In his mountain sanctuary, far from judgmental eyes, Lena forged her dignity. Where society saw a burden, she discovered an indomitable strength. She understood that true worth lay in the ability to rise and build one's own dignity. Yet, in quiet moments, she heard the inner scream of her former self, the one they called the burden. The shadows of the past, her father's words, and the crowd's jeers whispered in her mind. The mountain man, a silent guardian, watched her struggle as shame was replaced by unyielding self-belief. Until one day, smoke obscured the horizon, bringing news of a fire that consumed the town. The crowd, once her judge and executioner, now faced destruction. Those very people who had watched her humiliation with cruel delight, calling her the burden, had lost everything. The irony of fate was bitter. Lena felt a strange pang, not of satisfaction, but of complex emotions. Did those who had scorned her deserve her compassion? Soon, the conflagration forced them to seek shelter. They appeared at the mountain man's cabin, the very people who had abandoned and sold her. Their ravaged faces brought back painful memories. Lena remembered the sting of every penny and every sneer. She had been sold, humiliated, and now these very people stood on her doorstep, powerless and desperate. Her newfound strength would be put to the test. Could she forgive those who had condemned her? The cart creaked, pulling away from the town, and with it, the echoes of cruel laughter faded. Lena, still trembling with humiliation, felt the mountain man's gaze upon her, but there was no judgment in it, only a silent presence. Each clatter of the wheels carried her further from the world that had rejected her and closer to the unknown. Her heart beat erratically, mixing fear with hope. Was this the beginning of something other than suffering? She clung to the remnants of her dignity, trying to grasp this sudden turn of fate. The long journey and the heavy silence between them, different from what she knew, was filled with unspoken questions and promises of future strength. The mountain man communicated through actions. During rests, he silently offered water and dried meat. His rough hands were steady. At night, when the cold gnawed, he draped a blanket over her, and the blazing campfire provided warmth and security. Lena, accustomed to aggression and scorn, was bewildered. Instead of shouts and insults, she received practical, quiet respect. These wordless gestures slowly melted the ice of terror in her heart, replacing it with uncertainty. Was this man different? The path led through dense forests and rocky ridges, where the clean air carried the whisper of the wind and the song of birds. To Lena, a townswoman, wild nature was alien and terrifying. The mountain man moved with ease, as if he were a part of it, pointing out animal tracks and identifying plants. Compared to human cruelty, nature was neutral, harsh yet fair, not judging her weight or status. Lena watched with fascination, breathing more deeply. Away from human judgment, she began to perceive beauty in the surrounding world, and, more importantly, in herself. Each day with the mountain man taught her silence and practical care. When Lena stumbled, his strong hand immediately steadied her, without complaint or irritation. When the evening chill penetrated her thin clothing, a silent mug of warm herbal tea he had gathered would appear in her hands. In these gestures, there was no romance, but simple, stark kindness. He did not treat her like purchased cargo or a shame to be hidden, but like a person worthy of respect, regardless of her past or appearance. These daily acts of respect, like drops of water wearing away stone, slowly eroded the defensive wall around her heart. For the first time, Lena felt that her existence had worth, regardless of the cruel words. A quiet dignity began to rebuild within her. Despite the growing sense of safety and quiet acts of respect, Lena still carried the weight of her recent humiliation. Images from the auction, the mocking faces of the townspeople, the cruel words of her father and the crowd, the sting of every penny, returned in nightmares and quiet contemplation as the cart creaked through the forest. She felt like cargo, an object for sale, not a human being. The internal struggle was intense as the mountain man watched her in silence. In his gaze, there was no condemnation, yet Lena still saw the reflection of her own weight and shame, attributed to her by society. She tried to understand why this man, who shunned people and was alien to the world of the town, had saved her and treated her with such dignity. The past was a shadow, following her, testing her fragile hope. After many days of trekking through dense forests and steep mountain paths, Lena spotted a humble but sturdily built cabin. Blending into the mountainside, it was almost invisible without a wisp of smoke from its chimney. Silence reigned around, broken only by the murmur of a stream and the chirping of birds. Wild, untouched nature. This was the mountain man's refuge, a secluded place that was to become her sanctuary. She felt relief at the end of her journey and fear of the unknown. Would this place be safe? Would she find peace here from the echoes of the past? The side of the cabin was a tangible sign of the journey's end and the beginning of a new chapter. The mountain man, without a word, gestured toward the entrance, inviting her to a new stage of life. Despite her uncertainty, a quiet but persistent hope of finding her own strength settled in her heart. In the mountain man's secluded cabin, Lena takes her first, uncertain steps into a new reality. Each task, from chopping wood to carrying water and preparing meals, initially feels like a burden, reminding her of physical limitations and the societal judgment that had condemned her. Her shame is palpable, her movements marked by hesitation. However, under the watchful, though silent eye of her rescuer, Lena begins to discover a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. The mountain man doesn't judge. His few gestures and glances validate her efforts. He teaches her how to properly hold an axe, how to start a fire, how to recognize edible plants. Each mastered skill becomes a building block in developing her self-worth. Physical exhaustion gives way to the satisfaction of a job well done, and the burden of her body slowly begins to be perceived as a source of endurance. She starts to see herself not as Fat Lena, an object of ridicule and scorn, but as a person capable of survival and creation. This is a stage where physical labor becomes therapy, and every drop of sweat washes away layers of old shame, revealing her inner dignity. Her hands grow stronger, and her heart, once full of fear, begins to beat with the rhythm of new hope. In this simple, harsh environment, Lena learns that her worth doesn't depend on others' opinions, but on her own ability to act and survive. Lena's relationship with the mountain man developed in a realm of unspoken words and symbolic gestures, which become the foundation of her recovering self-esteem. A deep silence reigns in the cabin, broken only by the sounds of daily life. It is in this silence that the mountain man communicates his respect and care. He never raises his voice, never mocks, never looks with contempt, which had been the norm in her previous life. Instead, Lena notices small but significant actions: a warm blanket left on her sleeping place, an extra portion of stew in her bowl, a repaired tool to make work easier. His presence is constant but unobtrusive, offering a sense of security without the feeling of entrapment. When Lena struggles with a difficult task, he often appears beside her, offering a silent helping hand, not diminishing her effort, but strengthening her capabilities. These acts of selfless kindness, so foreign to her past experience, slowly convince her that she is no longer a burden or an object of ridicule. She begins to understand that his respect doesn't stem from her appearance or status, but from her dignity as a human being. In his eyes, though their gazes rarely meet, Lena perceives an acceptance and appreciation that are like a balm for the wounds inflicted by society's cruelty. This quiet, practical treatment is crucial for her internal transformation, teaching her that true worth lies in being seen and appreciated for who you are. Gradually, Lena transitions from deep shame and the feeling of being a burden to an awareness of her self-worth and her role as a capable partner in their secluded life. Initially, her every action was marked by fear of failure and the expectation of old prejudices being confirmed. However, as she mastered new skills and saw the practical results of her work, warm meals, clean clothes, a supply of wood for winter, her internal monologue began to change. She stopped hearing the echoes of cruel words from the cataloxen. Instead, she began to perceive her own effectiveness. She noticed how her body, once a source of shame and public humiliation, was becoming stronger and more resilient. Initially shy, then increasingly confident smiles began to appear on her face, and a quiet hum accompanied her daily activities. Not only did she stop feeling like a burden to the mountain man, but she began to see herself as an integral part of their small world, a person whose contribution was valuable and essential. This shift in perspective is revolutionary. Lena ceases to be a passive victim and becomes an active participant in her own life. It is an internal awakening where dignity begins to displace shame and a sense of strength replaces worthlessness. She discovers that her worth isn't an external label, but an inner truth she can cultivate herself. In the mountain man's secluded cabin, Lena's life took on a slow but soothing rhythm, which with each passing day became synonymous with security and peace for her. Each day was measured by simple, repetitive tasks that initially seemed monotonous but quickly became an anchor in the tumultuous sea of her past. Sunrise brought morning duties, lighting a few chickens, lighting a fire in the hearth to prepare a humble breakfast. Midday was for working in the small garden, where Lena learned to recognize herbs and tend to vegetables, and also for preparing a meal, often from what had been gathered in the forest. Evening closed the day with a shared, though usually silent, supper by the crackling hearth, followed by the quiet of the night, interrupted only by the sounds of the forest. This methodical order, so diametrically opposed to the chaos and cruelty of her previous city life, had a soothing effect on Lena. In this structured world, where every action had its place and purpose, Lena found relief. The silence of the forest, the fresh, crisp air, and the simplicity of existence allowed her to rediscover an inner peace she had believed lost forever. She began to appreciate the beauty of small things, the taste of freshly baked bread, the warmth of the fire on her hands, the sights of the setting sun. Painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. It was here, far from judging glances and brutal words, that Lena experienced what true refuge was. The cabin became her sanctuary, a place where her burden was irrelevant, and her shame gradually faded, replaced by a sense of belonging and dignity that grew within her with each new dawn. The routine, which initially might have seemed like a burden, became a source of strength and stability, helping her solidify her newfound self-esteem. A pivotal moment in Lena's process of reclaiming her dignity was how the mountain man perceived her, or rather, how he didn't perceive her, using old, cruel metrics. He never commented on her appearance, her physique, or her past. In his gaze, there was no shadow of judgment, only practical recognition for her efforts and quiet respect for her as a person. Lena, who her entire life had been judged and humiliated because of her weight, learned in his presence that her worth wasn't tied to her body, physicality, but to what she could do and who she was inside. When she performed arduous tasks, chopping wood, carrying water from the stream, tending the garden, and he nodded his head in approval, Lena felt she was seen as a capable and strong individual, not as Fat Lena, a burden to be sold or an object of ridicule. It was in his silent, accepting gaze that she began to see her own reflection, one entirely different from what she had seen in the eyes of the cruel town community. In this new reflection, there was no shame, but dignity. There was no weakness, but strength. He, through his unconditional acceptance and practical protection, became the mirror in which Lena for the first time saw herself as a person of worth. This unspoken validation was more powerful than 1,000 words of promise, because it came from someone who was himself an outsider, living on the fringes of society, and who saw beyond the surface, appreciating the true essence of a person. In his eyes, Lena was simply Lena, a human being, not the sum of her flaws. Smoke on the horizon thickened, painting the sky red. Lena's peace, built over months, began to crumble. From the dense forest emerged a man, exhausted, ragged, his face covered in soot and fear. He collapsed at the cabin's doorstep. "The town, it burned," he gasped. "People are fleeing, seeking refuge." The refugee's words clenched Lena's heart, awakening old fears. The humiliation from her past, when she was perceived as a burden, shattered her peace. Days passed, and more groups of refugees arrived. Lena helped the mountain man, her heart pounding as she observed the newcomers. Finally, among the dirty, exhausted faces, she recognized her former tormentors, those who had mocked her and called her a disgrace. Now, desperate and humiliated, their eyes were filled with fear. Their sight struck Lena like a hammer, tearing open old wounds. She felt a tightening in her chest, a shudder of revulsion and fear. She had to confront her past. Could she look them in the eye without hatred? Would her newfound strength be enough for this unexpected test? That night, Lena couldn't sleep. A fierce battle raged in her mind. Bitterness and a desire for revenge for past humiliations, warring against the newfound strength and dignity she had learned from the mountain man. Could she allow hatred to consume her, abandoning those teachings? The dilemma was agonizing: punish them or help. While Lena slept, the mountain man sat by the fire. His face, as still as a rock face, revealed deep reflection. He knew Lena awaited his decision. Would he turn the refugees away? Without a word, he rose and gestured towards the barn, taking them in. This stern, silent gesture was like a cold shower for Lena. She understood that he was guided by an unyielding moral code. He helped those in need, regardless of their past or any desire for revenge. The mountain man's stance became both an example and a challenge for her. Lena, could she rise above her own pain and hatred, just as he did? He demonstrated that true strength lay in forgiveness and offering help, even to those who had wronged her. Sharing a roof was difficult, marked by tension as thick as smoke. The refugees, grateful for shelter, looked at Lena with a mixture of fear, shame, and their former contempt. They avoided her gaze, and Lena felt their silent judgments and whispers. Every meal, every shared task was a test. Lena strove to maintain her composure, emulating the silent dignity of the mountain man. Inside, however, she wrestled with the question, could she truly forgive them? This was Lena's ultimate test. In a new reality where her tormentors had become her housemates, their very survival depended on her kindness, could she rise above the pain? In the confined space where past collided with present, she had to decide who she was, a vengeful victim or a woman capable of finding the strength of compassion and dignity. That had devoured the city left behind nothing but rubble and ash. Those who once scorned Lena now stood at the threshold of her refuge, dirty, starving, and terrified. They had come seeking help from the man they despised and the woman they'd publicly humiliated by selling her at auction. Their faces, once cruel, now showed desperation and shame. Lena, standing beside the silent mountain man, watched them as old wounds battled her newfound unwavering strength. It was a sight that choked her. Those who had called her a burden were now a burden themselves, begging for mercy. The air was heavy with the smell of scorched earth, unspoken words, and regret. This was a confrontation not only with them, but also with her own past, with all the shame they had inflicted upon her. Would she find the dignity within herself to help them, or would she allow the cruelty she had experienced to triumph? Her heart pounded like a drum, and memories of that day at the market thundered in her. This moment was a test of everything she had gained. Yes, truly everything. As the city's crowd stood before their cabin, Lena felt the old shame try to engulf her again, as if those cruel voices were whispering in her ear once more. But this was no longer the broken Lena of old. Her heart beat stronger, not from fear, but from a new, grounded strength. She remembered every cruel remark, every contemptuous look, every word that had made her a burden to society. Now, in their eyes, she saw fear and pleading, and her own reflection in their pained faces was different, stronger, more dignified. This was her moment of truth. She had to find words to express what she felt, without succumbing to hatred, yet without allowing herself to be humiliated again. When an older man who had once bit on her like an animal began to beg for shelter, Lena felt words well up within her. When I was at my lowest, when I was just a burden to you, where were you? These words, spoken, marked the beginning of her assertion. It was the first time she openly defied those who had wronged her, proving her much-needed worth and strength. The confrontation gained momentum as Lena stood face to face with her own father, the one who had sold her. His hypocrisy was blatant and painful. "Lena, you must help us. You are our family. You are my daughter," he pleaded, as if there had never been an auction, as if he had never treated her as a worthless burden, abandoning her to a cruel society. But Lena was no longer the naive, broken girl. Her voice, though trembling with emotion, was full of newfound strength and dignity, like steel. "You called me a burden. You sold me like cattle. Where was family then? Where was your pity when I stood at the market, publicly humiliated?" she asked, her words a blow striking at the heart of their hypocrisy. "I am not yours to claim. I am no one's property. I am a human being. I have dignity that you stripped from me, but which I have reclaimed." She spoke these words with such power that even the mountain man standing behind her felt pride, and the crowd listened in silence. Some lowered their gaze in shame. Others finally saw in her not fat Lena, but a woman full of extraordinary strength and character. It was a rejection of her cruel past, a breaking of the chains of shame, and a public declaration of her independence and true, priceless worth. Throughout the confrontation, the mountain man stood beside Lena, his silent presence more potent than 1,000 words of accusation or pleading. His gaze, though calm, left no doubt that Lena was under his unwavering protection, and any attempts to humiliate her again or undermine her dignity would be met with his absolute, unyielding force. When Lena's father, full of desperation and old arrogance, tried to raise his voice to silence her, the mountain man took a step forward, his powerful and fearless presence immediately silencing the oppressor. He didn't need to resort to violence. His reputation and sheer physical presence alone were enough to bring everyone to order. He was Lena's moral and physical bulwark, giving her the certainty that she could speak without fear, that her words carried weight and were protected. His actions, subtle but decisive, showed that he was ready to defend her dignity and place in this world, not just now, but always. This was the ultimate proof that her worth didn't depend on the cruel words of others, but on the love and respect of those who truly saw and valued her inner strength and spirit. After Lena clearly set boundaries and the mountain man ensured no one would cross them, the moment for her final decision arrived. Lena's heart, though full of memories of cruelty and humiliation, couldn't entirely reject those who were now helpless, trembling with cold and hunger. She looked at the children, the elderly, those who, though culpable, were suffering. She understood that true strength lay not in revenge, nor in reciprocating cruelty, but in the dignity that allows one to rise above pain and forgive, even if only conditionally. "You may stay," she said, her voice calm but firm, imbued with newfound authority. "But in my home, my rules apply. There is no room here for contempt, judgment, or treating anyone as a burden. Everyone will work and respect others." It was an act of grace that shattered the city's pride. Their hypocrisy was laid bare, and now they had to accept the terms of the woman they had scorned in order to survive. This was not weakness, it was the highest form of strength, proving that a person's true worth is not defined by pain, but by the ability to rise above it and offer redemption to all. As the city residents slowly began to adapt to life under Lena and the mountain man's roof, a new kind of peace settled in the cabin, though still tinged with echoes of the past. Lena and the mountain man sat by the fire. They looked at each other, and in their eyes reflected the entire journey they had traveled, from shame and loneliness, through pain and the fight for dignity and newfound strength, to a shared future. They didn't need declarations. Their shared experiences, mutual understanding, and unwavering support were a sufficient promise. The mountain man gently took her hand, and this simple, sincere gesture spoke of an unbreakable bond. A partnership forged in the toughest of times, a love that had grown from respect and protection. It was the end of their personal struggle, but the beginning of their shared life, proof that true love and respect can blossom even in the most hostile conditions, creating a refuge that no societal cruelty could destroy. Their strength was now shared, and their dignity inviolable, offering hope for a new beginning, free from the burden of the past and full of true worth. Lena, once seen as a burden, became a beacon of dignity and strength. Her transformation showed that true worth doesn't come from cruel judgment, but from the power of forgiveness. This was an inspiration. The bitter irony? Those who had once humiliated Lena now sought refuge and compassion from her. What are shame and worth when the tables turn? The community had to reevaluate its prejudices, exposing its own hypocrisy. The mountain man, the silent protector, though he instilled fear, was the only one who saw Lena's true worth. His quiet actions, full of protection and respect, challenged society's cruelty and became the catalyst for her inner strength. Lena's journey, from burden to a beacon of dignity, ended with hope. The town, forced into introspection by fire, began to understand empathy. A person's true worth lies deep within them, not in superficial judgments. This is a lesson for us all, leading to a deeper understanding. And you, dear listener, have you ever felt judged, pushed to the sidelines? Where are you listening to this story tonight? In what corner of the world do you seek solace? Your experiences are part of this universal truth. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. And if you believe that love and dignity can flourish even in the most challenging places, stay with us. The next story awaits you, bringing another lesson about the strength of the human spirit.